Who'd have thought a game about preventing your wife, who's also your cousin, from killing you while ensuring your grandchild and only heir doesn't turn into a sadistic puppy killer that the entire realm will instantly rebel against is a bit difficult to grasp. And the sheer number of guides reflect this. CK3 how-to videos have become a virtual industry in of themselves. But in my experience, it's difficult to find one that actually caters to normal people. You know, guys and gals who bought the game in a Steam sale and are more interested in actually surviving than forming an Islamic caliphate in Western Europe. And that's where I come in. My guide to CK3 will try as hard as possible to equip you for survival without massively overcomplicating the basics or focusing obsessively on mechanics only a true master would need to understand. So get that lubrication ready because there won't be any unnecessary friction on this journey. The one major theme of CK3 is that the personal is political. In the real medieval world, everything from the strength of your seed to the heft of your armies was dictated by personal relationships. This wasn't an era of nations or peoples, but often related dynasties vying for control of the family business and that of their not so distant cousins. With vast peasant armies whose access was dependent on their relationship with other lords, not national conscription or ideology. If you're American, think of Game of Thrones season 1 to 4. And if you're British, actual history. And every aspect of CK3's complex political drama operates by the same rules. Unlike fellow Paradox Interactive grand strategy titles like EU4, CK3 doesn't revolve around a nation or peoples, but an individual and their dynastic descendants. And its mechanics for conquest, from raising an army to claiming a territory, revolve around personal relationships and familial claims. So understanding how these mechanics work can be the difference between life, death, and ancestral chaos. When I first played CK3, I learned this the hard way. You see, after watching a 30-minute tutorial, I believed I was ready to restore the Roman Empire despite starting as a humble Irish lord. As many overconfident noobs experience, initially I wasn't immediately punished for this hubris. CK3 might unceremoniously shove 9,000 different mechanics in your face, but when you've only got one territory, with no lord level vassals and limited family, you just have to know the essentials, like county management. The county is the foundation of CK3. It's essentially the minimum territory a player can control to avoid a game over, and it's fairly simple to understand. Counties are made up of 3 territorial types for non-tribal lords: baronies, bishoprics, and cities, each of whom provide tax benefits and soldiers depending mostly on 2 stats: development and control. Development and control grow over time in a relatively natural manner, but this growth will be at a snail's pace in the early game, and this is where another key mechanic comes into play: the council. The most simple way to understand how the council works is to visualize its equivalent in Game of Thrones and add more violence,
cut off his manhood and feed it to the goats.
far more incest, and less women. Councillors in CK3 are each in charge of a single function, ranging from military matters to money to good old propaganda, which in CK3 is referred to as religion. The performance of any given councillor at the task you give them is dependent on how high their stats are in the area that corresponds to their role. For example, a courtier of high military stats and non-existent diplomacy would make a great commander, and a pathological liar,
it's an epic about hope, our shared humanity,
a tremendous diplomat. These advisors will not only improve your control over counties and ability to extract resources, but also power your early expansion through claim fabrication. Fabrication is pretty easy to understand. You send a priest from your territory to another to do what priests do: scam and protect the interests of the powerful. With enough luck, you'll convince locals that Saddam Hussein of Dublin is an illegitimate ruler, and you, although a virtual stranger, is the rightful lord. In my first playthrough, I knew just enough about fabrication, council, and county management to generate claims on local counties and then exploit them with ruthless efficiency. So no man, woman, or child was safe by wrath, which also happens to be the official motto of the Israeli military. You see, in CK3, there might be 3 army types and a bunch of mechanisms to grow in them, but knowing that if I pressed a button I could raise a military force from provinces known as levies, and that their size was dependent on me and my wife's military score, made things fairly simple to understand early on. So after a few decades of new play, I had conquered enough territories to wrest control of a dukedom. And this is where things started to spiral. You see, I thought I was balling.
I stopped in 5 guys and give me a dance. They know a player. They in there talking about it now.
And because of the arrogance this came with, I made all the classic litany of mistakes new money guys fall into. I spent too much money buying new drip, too much time chasing women, and paid not nearly enough attention to the future. So when my character died suspiciously, everything fell apart. But before I go into this, remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Every game has its rules, and this is YouTube's. Anyway, upon the death of my OG character, I found out that his son, who I was now controlling, might have been a duke, but he was a much diminished one. You see, half of his father's counties were gladly adopted by his younger brothers, and part of his father's territory had become completely independent. So it almost felt like I was starting from step one, all because I forgot CK3 was not about war, but personal relationships. And so I neglected a key aspect of this equation, succession. Saying succession in the medieval period was just a little bit messy is like describing Nagasaki as moderately renovated. Not only were succession laws highly varied and often contradictory, with different tiers of inheritance, but, and this tended to complicate things, everyone wants to kill you. And CK3 is no different. In my case, I was caught out by subdivision. In CK3, there are 4 main types of inheritable and obtainable feudal holdings: counties, dukedoms, kingdoms, and empires. I'm not covering republics, so don't complain in the comments. Anyway, dukedoms, kingdoms, and empires can be formed if you have control of their de jure extent, either by owning a majority of the territory within, or simply stealing it through a claim. De jure refers to the theoretical extent of a territory. For example, if I form a host and take over 3 dukedoms in Palestine, the territory I have taken will still remain part of the de jure kingdom of Palestine despite my ownership. And at this stage, failing to understand this was fatal. You see, once you become a big man of the medieval world, not only are your counties subdivided among your heirs, but also your titles, including your theoretical ones. In my case, a dukedom I had the de jure right to create, but chose not to, fell straight into the hands of one of my younger sons, splitting my territory into 2 independent dukedoms, thereby rapidly diminishing the power of my primary successor. At this stage, I couldn't have done much about the actual laws of succession, because the terms of which will be dictated by realm succession laws, which can only be changed if you have researched the succession type, which is not plausible in early game, and your vassals sanction the change. So I'm going to teach you guys a few hacks I should have known and you guys need to know to get around this in the early game. The first is good old disinheritance. Just like in the Fire Kingdom, one way of getting around the troubles of a traditional inheritance structure is to remove the competition. In CK3, at the expense of dynastic renown, you can remove your excess kids from the line of succession. And when you've done this, really secure your future by bringing in the second key ingredient, MILFs. Like in real life, MILFs come with a unique mix of infertility and experience in kingdom management, so you won't have to deal with any disruptions to succession. But you see, this is only the first step. Now your kingdom's near future is secure, you can start thinking about conquests. As I said earlier, learning how to micromanage personal relationships is the key to success in CK3, and conquest is no different. You might be able to pick up a county here and there with a good old Catholic scamming, but as with the real medieval world, the real big booty will always come from family. The strongest claims are always passed down through the dominant line of a family to their descendants. And I say dominant, not father, because there's a slight loophole any CK3 player needs to understand. You see, if you're powerful enough, it's possible to force a man into a matrilineal relationship where their offspring becomes part of her dynasty, enabling you to essentially steal his claim for your guys. But most of the lords will not be willing to hand over their strongest claimants to your dynasty, so you'll either have to marry your daughter matrilineally to a distant claimant and kill the rest, or much more simply, invite a claimant and make them your vassal. You see, if your vassal inherits or gains a title below that of your own, you will become overlord of that territory. But you won't be able to fight a claimant war or improve your inheritance in the long run without another key aspect. And this is where vassal management becomes fundamental to your survival. You see, in CK3, if your vassals do not either like or fear your leadership, you might as well raise the white flag of surrender and wait for an Israeli sniper to knock you off. Because just like in the real medieval world, everything runs on loyalty. You see, before modern surveillance technologies enabled forms of control like Epstein Island and P. Diddy, kings and dukes had to heavily delegate everything from taxation to raising levies. And so often, whether a king retained his head or not was dependent on how well he managed the loyalty of important people within his territory. And CK3 plays by these rules with brutal application. When you grow beyond the boundaries of county life to form great dukedoms or kingdoms, or even empires, you become a manager. And so you have to think like one. No longer is your personal holding the focal point of your kingdom. Important administrative choices, like changing your inheritance law, requires vassal approval, and how strong your military force is, and how unwilling everyone else is to kill you, will be dependent on your control over powerful vassals who themselves control a network of other vassals. So you need to know what it takes to control your stable so the whole farm doesn't collapse. These control mechanisms can be broadly split into two categories, legal and personal. Legal control refers mainly to crown authority. Crown authority is a mechanism that determines the minimum levy vassals are required to give you, but it comes with an important trade-off that you need to learn how to manage: the hatred of all others. As crown authority increases, so does vassal dissatisfaction. And like in the colonies now referred to as the US, your former subjects will fight and die to hold their slaves in freedom if you take too many liberties and hoard power beyond that which you can sustain, leading to a kind of destructive cycle where the more your vassals hate you, the less likely they are to approve your legal changes and the less willing they are to offer your troops. So not only will your heir be in a weaker position with less capacity to defend against external and internal enemies, but because opinion modifiers carry over, the chance they'll face a rebellion will be far higher. But all is not lost. You see, there are some useful hacks any would-be survivor can quickly deploy to reduce their chance of dying horribly. First of all, consolidation. Vassals can only rebel against their direct liege, so if you consolidate your territories, you'll have fewer individuals to worry about. But once you've cleaned up your borders, the quickest and easiest way to immediately build rapport with important lads is through a council appointment. Your high-level vassals would expect to be on your council, and if they're not, you'll receive a hefty penalty with them. And then there are other forms like feasting is a really good way to build a rapport, hunts, money, seduction, and if you're an intrigue-based character, fabricating hooks to make sure they essentially can't rebel against you. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If you didn't, no refunds in your time.